Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are really excited to have so many folks with us today for our first open office hour of the 2021 reporting period. I'm joined here today with my colleague Matt Welker and Paula Capo, and we are really excited for the conversation and to walk you all through the DDX. We know we have a mix of folks here who are likely experts and pros and have gone through the reporting seasons now for many years, as well as folks who this will be their first time. So we're excited to address any and all questions as we go. With that in mind, I'll pause here and Matt and Paula, if you guys would like to introduce yourselves briefly, would be thrilled for all those who don't yet know you to make your acquaintance.
Absolutely. So I'm Matt Welker. I've spoken with many of the folks on the call or helped you in the inbox, or you've joined a previous open office hour. I'm on staff here at AI National working on the 2030 commitment, as I have for the last year and a half or 2 years or so. And I'm excited to be with you guys again this January and this reporting season as we gear up for that March 31st deadline.
Hi, I'm Paula Capo. I've also been working with the 2030 commitment and the DDX at AI National for several years now, and excited to have Charlotte on board to help us out now. So hopefully you'll enjoy today's session.
Thanks, Paula and Matt. We have a whole bunch of new folks who just joined in the past minute or 60 seconds. So if you didn't catch that brief introduction at the head, my name is Charlotte Dreisen. I'm a member of the 2030 commitment team here at AIA National. We're here today to talk through the DDX, the platform that you'll be using to report as a signatory of the 2030 commitment this year, with the deadline coming up on March 31st. We are so excited for the conversation here today. And as we get started, I would love for folks to drop into the chat whether this is your first year reporting or how many years you have been reporting for, so we could get a sense of more or less who's in the audience. That would be really helpful to us as we get going. And while folks do that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll walk through a handful of slides and go through some of the new changes to the DDX that have taken place since the last reporting period. And then we'll also have a demo from Matt here on our team of the platform itself. And we really hope to make this as much of a conversation as possible and minimize our talking and really hear from you all about what you would like to know and what questions you might have. So we'll be sure to pause at numerous points throughout the presentation today to stop for questions. And please feel free to drop them in the chat as we go as well. But before we jump in and get started, I'd just like to pause and see if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question. If you have a burning question that you want to make sure we cover, we'd be thrilled for you to unmute and give us a shout and let us know what's top of mind for you now, or go ahead and drop it in the chat. So I'll pause there for just a moment. It's okay if not, if no one has anything quite yet they're curious about, but really wonderful to see so many folks have a diversity of experience. It looks like a couple of folks with us had been reporting almost since the very start of the program, about 9-10 years ago, and lots of new faces as well. So with that, we'll get going and start this open office session, walking through the DD reporting period of 2021. And as I mentioned, we're going to go through some of the high-level DDX 101s here just to orient ourselves in case this is your first time hearing the acronym. We're here to look at the Design Data Exchange, which is the free online platform that we provide as part of the 2030 commitment to help signatories track their progress towards the 2030 commitment goals and help us aggregate data so we can see how the industry is a whole. And most folks here on the line are likely very familiar with the targets here on the right-hand side of the screen. They were developed by Architecture 2030, an independent nonprofit in the early 2000s when the program launched in 2010. We started off with a target of 60% reduction of predicted energy use intensity, and they're increasing, of course, towards our goal of full carbon neutrality for new buildings as existing buildings that are experiencing major renovations by 2030. And today we have an 80% target of predicted energy use intensity reduction compared to a baseline for a conventional building. So you'll hear us talk a lot about predicted energy use intensity today. That's likely something you're already very familiar with if you've been in the DDX and reporting for some time, but it might be new for you otherwise. And that's the main metric that we're looking at and tracking for whole building projects, whether they're new construction or whether they're an existing building that's undergoing renovation. For interior only projects, we have a different metric that we use. It's lighting power density or predicted lighting power density, which we have a current target for of 25%. But we won't focus on that quite as much today. And we'll be focusing on the majority of you all who will be tracking predicted energy use intensity and working to demonstrate reduction in predicted energy use intensity in projects throughout your portfolio. On the right-hand side here is a snapshot of what the DDX, the Design Data Exchange, looks like. It's a cloud-based reporting tool that is fully confidential and uses only anonymous data when we aggregate it up and crunch the numbers on how the industry is doing. It allows you to compare projects not only within your firm and see how a given project is comparing to your firm average, but to also compare projects by type, size, climate, and many other attributes. It allows you to track that predicted energy use intensity in addition to many other fields that we've been adding iteratively over the years, including embodied carbon and some other important metrics to enable you to better track a more holistic picture of your performance. If you aren't already in the DDX, please do reach out to your administrative point of contact at your company to get yourself added. If that administrative point of contact is you, we really encourage you to invite project team members across your firm so that everyone can access and view this energy performance data together. It's really helpful for this not to be concentrated in just one person role and enable this to be a place where everyone can look together at how projects are performing, what predicted energy use intensity is your baseline, what's your target, and then of course how your projects compare between those two parameters. If you aren't already a member or have an account on the DDX, just give us a shout if you don't know who to contact with your company, and we can help you do that as well. One other helpful thing to understand about the DDX is it's not only a great place to congregate online within your firm, but you can also allow collaborators outside of your firm to view projects in the DDX. This can be particularly helpful if you are the associate firm or an AOR firm and you're hoping to have folks you're working with collaboratively on a project view and add data for a specific project. They won't be able to see your portfolio outside of that one project that you're inviting them to. This is also a really great way to pull in consultants or contractors you have on a project in, especially if you have a consultant who's doing energy modeling for you, so they can go ahead and add that data into the DDX. One of the main questions that we get from folks, especially folks who are just starting their journey as a 2030 commitment signatory, is what projects should you be tracking in the DDX? And the short answer is really most of them, anything that has an HVAC system or lighting, which turns out to be most buildings. In your sustainability action plan, which is something that you develop over the course of your first year as a 2030 commitment signatory, you may already have one if you've been a member for some time. You'll basically want to be articulating how and which projects you're inputting. Some folks decide that they want to have a size threshold, so the very small minor projects that they might be working on in their portfolio won't be something that you add to the DDX. But it's generally something that you want to be reporting all of your projects across your portfolio through anything in the active design phase. In addition to that, of course, not only whole buildings are a good fit to report through the DDX, but as we mentioned, interior only projects are a great fit too as well to track. If this is your first time reporting into the DDX, this is your first year and you've become a signatory this past year, we are in, just to be extra clear, the reporting year for 2021. It's like your taxes, you look at the year previously, so you'll be wanting to add data for projects during that time frame. And just another note perhaps to add there is some folks also are curious about whether only high performing buildings, ones that are really achieving or are working towards achieving the 2030 targets are what they should be entering. And And to answer that, maybe ahead of any questions that come in, we want to be reporting all projects, regardless of whether they are an exceptionally high performing building or whether it's more of an average project in your portfolio that you're working to integrate sustainability and energy performance as you can, but it may not be core to the mission of that particular project. As you know, of course, that the 2030 commitments energy targets are across your portfolio. So we want to be getting a snapshot of what that entire picture looks like. That's what's most helpful to you, to be able to get a macro level view of the data that you have across your projects, not just the high performing ones. So you can see where you need to be doing better and see where you're already doing really well, to be able to compare and contrast. And of course, when we aggregate this data every year in the 2030 by the numbers report, we also want to be having this holistic profession as a whole is moving towards carbon. Or those team permissions, if you want to be adding a collaborator, perhaps a consultant who's been doing energy modeling, or someone you're working with in another team. The bulk upload process is excellent for big firms, big databases, big portfolios where you can upload thousands of entries at one time. We have a really great open office hour that occurred last month in December on this topic alone. If you go to the 2030 Commitments YouTube page, you can check it out. We could also email it to you if you have any interest to learn more about the bulk upload process. If that's what seems like it might be a good fit for you, really encourage you to check it out. This is a really great way to streamline your process if you have a really large amount of projects in your portfolio. And of course, there are also energy modeling softwares that have an API with the DDX that allow you to report directly through the software and get that info into the DDX as well, without having to pull it out of one software and upload it into the other. There are 8 energy modeling softwares that have that API integrated today. We have those on the DDX's help pages if you'd like to take a look, and we can also follow up with anyone offline about those if you need help being directed to the right place. So that might also be a good fit. You can also use a combination of these processes if you so choose. But with direct input in mind, we're going to go through a number of the changes that have been made to the DDX since the last reporting period, so you can get an idea of what to keep your eyes out for as Matt gives us a demo of the platform. If you are intimately acquainted with the platform, you'll likely see some of these new things appear as we walk through it. And if not, they're just helpful to keep in mind as you move into the reporting period and begin adding project data from your portfolio. So one of the 2 big overarching changes that have occurred in the DDX since the most recent reporting period is a new reporting year format and project types being simplified. Whereas in the old DDX or in previous iterations, you selected a specific date like January 20th, 2022, or what have you, to enter for a project, you now simply select the reporting year. So for all of the data that you'll be entering for your projects for this reporting period, it's really important that you're adding 2021, and adding that data is reporting year 2021 to that project data. So that's important to make sure it's all rolled up into your submission correctly. It's also important to keep your eye out for the 2 options for project types that we have. There used to be more options here, and we've simplified them down into whole building or interior only. And that impacts the 2 main metrics that you'll be looking at, which we talked a little bit about earlier, that for whole building projects, you're mostly measuring predicted energy use intensity and reduction in predicted energy use intensity. That's what you're looking at. And for interior only, it's LPD. In terms of renewable energy fields, we're really excited to see so many folks making use of renewable energy options that we've had in the DDX, including photovoltaic, solar thermal, and wind. We've been really excited to add a handful of new options as renewable energy fields that you can select if your project is using renewable energy, whether on or off site, including heat pump, geothermal, micro hydroelectric, and biomass. And for those of you who are doing energy or carbon modeling, which we very much encourage, we have a number of new energy modeling tools that you can select in the dropdown when inputting the predicted energy use intensity that your energy modeling gave you, including these listed here below. In addition to the new tool options, we also have new energy modeling date and carbon modeling date fields. This has been really helpful for folks who are doing an awesome job of iteratively modeling energy over the course of a project's life cycle, both early on and as they work through the design phases, so they can make use of tracking that information chronologically in the DDX and seeing down towards of 80% reduction today. And like definitely encourage you to check out in the annual By the Numbers report if you haven't already. It details a number of great case studies, including those on embodied carbon and how folks have been tracking embodied carbon in the DDX, and is something really exciting to consider as you think about how you can track impact more holistically in your projects. And lastly, there are a number of new energy codes here that have been added. There's a full list of energy codes that you can select from, but these are 5 ones that a lot of folks have been emailing and asking about. So we're excited to say that the wait is over and you can now select from these options in addition to the ones that the DDX supported previously. If you'd like to take a look through as a whole, you can through the link in the PDF here that we will be sure to send out after the conversation today, but are excited to also announce this. And I'll pause here before turning the baton over to my colleague Matt to walk us through the DDX itself, now that we know some of the new fields that we've added to the platform this most recent period. And thanks, Matt, for linking that presentation on bulk upload there. And wonderful to see a few questions here that are coming in pretty fast. Let's see. One question about whether all phases should be reported. We definitely encourage folks to report at all phases if they're able, especially if you're doing energy modeling. That's a really important way that you'll be able to track progress. If you've not been doing energy modeling or there hasn't been a change in the energy modeling, of course, there wouldn't necessarily be a change relative to the baseline. So I don't think that is mission critical to add. There is a new design phase. And Matt, can I ask your thoughts here on a great second question here about whether master plan projects or those in entitlement count? Certainly for those who are designing and building large developments that may have multiple projects. Very much encourage folks to have individual projects uploaded to the DDX and perhaps use a naming convention like, major development - residential 1 - residential 2 to keep track of those and keep them in one place. But I would be thrilled for some of my colleagues' thoughts there on the larger master planning question.
The master planning question is an interesting one. It's one that comes up every year. It always looks a little bit different, and each firm is tackling it a little bit differently. It actually sort of relates to Karina's question around where do you set a threshold for your firm. There are some firms who report to DDX who, when they're developing their master plans, are setting energy targets and then are reporting those as individual projects within their master plan. That generally is sort of the highest level guidance. If you're not setting an energy target for your master plan, whether it's campus-wide or individual buildings, then it's probably okay to not include it. It's a murky gray area that largely has to do with your firm, your business, and where you're setting those targets. And a great opportunity to plug the peer-to-peer Basecamp network, but also I'd encourage folks who are using it or approaching master planning in their chat to add some feedback for Pauline. I'll also go ahead and field Karina's question, since it's closely related. A great place to document what your threshold is, if you're including master plans or if you're not, what your naming conventions are, is actually your sustainability action plan, whether that's the version that you share with us that goes into the public directory, or if it's an addendum to that plan that you keep internally and reference. That's a great time when you're in an engagement process with your team to say, what does this commitment mean to us as a firm and how are we going to operationalize it? There are any number of ways that firms have cut that. Obviously, as Charlotte mentioned, our preference is all projects that have an opportunity to impact energy and ultimately carbon. But we understand that for some firms, that's not possible. So that's where I would encourage you to document it and then reinforce that, especially this is a great time of year to do lunch and learn or hop on a video presentation or invite your staff to these calls to go ahead and just do a tune-up, just to check in and say, hey, this is where we're at as a company. This is how we apply the 2030 commitment, and then move forward. And there's some familiar faces on here who have brought in our team to help with that, which is also always an option. Daniel asked about code equivalents for the new codes. There are code equivalents available for those. Those are in the help pages, which you can get to anytime you're in the DDX by clicking on the question mark inside the circle icon. And that'll bring you to the table that includes those. That's especially practical if you're a firm that uses a database and then uses the bulk entry. The code equivalents are also provided in the specific bulk input guide that also lives within our help pages, but is a self-contained PDF document that you can download and share with teams.
Thanks, Matt. Sorry to have, I think, had my audio cut out there for a few moments through these concepts. To do that and dive in.
It seems, Charlotte, like you,
how people and how much people are.
It seems like Charlotte might be cutting in and out a little bit. Can folks see the DDX on my screen at this time? Can I get like a thumbs up emoji or a yes? I love that. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Mona. Appreciate that affirmation that we're seeing the screen. So I've just logged in into the DDX. This is a demo account called Acme View Architects. I believe folks who have been on these calls with me before have seen it. Y'all know Leslie Nope. She's our demo user for our Parks and Rec shout out. She is an administrator. This profile is an administrator for a firm that's reporting about 25, 26 projects per year, which is really a typical use case for many of the firms who are reporting data. So when you arrive on the dashboard, along the top, you're going to see Portfolio tab. Those are just the projects that either you've created or you've added. And it's also where you're going to go to update your account information, a name change, an email change, a phone number change. All of that gets taken care of in my account. You can also reset and change your password. The second tab is the company tab. It looks really similar to the portfolio tab, but instead of showing just the projects that you either created or have been added to as a collaborator, it shows all of the projects that your company is working on. And this is based on your relationship between individual account and company account. Anybody who's been added as a user to the company can see all of the projects within the company, but it also has the top level information around contact information of the firm. You can set your POC. This is a great time of year to make sure, you know, maybe Ron Swanson did the reporting last year, was the POC, and now it's Leslie to go in and make that switch. It's also where you and any member of your company can view your signatory letter and download a copy of your sustainability action plan. So again, to comment about Karina's question, a great place where if it's documented, you can point them back. Everything's in this one tool. At the bottom of the screen, lower down, relevant for administrators are the office and studio locations and the employee information. Administrators can edit this information. All other users can see this information. The office studios is particularly important when you go to set up projects. Again, we see that some firms, when they join, maybe start with 2 studios and in their second year go to 3 or 4 studios. In that case, you would need to add them into the system. You can also see the API request log. This is your going to go-to space if you're using the API integration, if you're bringing in information from Cove Tool or Insights 360 or any of the other softwares that have built out that connection. Your firm key is consistent across your company. Your user key, which you'll need to click by clicking generate, that is specific to you as a user, and that makes sure that your edits are credited back to you in the system. I know that there's some firms who, going back to the old tool, have sort of just used one user key and one firm key. Go and have your individual users generate a key. It helps promote accountability and helps you track down, hey, where did this number come from? Are the assumptions right? The API key, I'm not sure the frequency with which it changes. You can use it for a sort of a period of time, but sometimes it'll come back as negative in that case, or like it'll be rejected. And in that case, you just need to generate it. But it shouldn't be every time you use it. Also in the company tab, you have the 2030 commitment resources. These are basic tools we've developed to share with you all to assist in your journey, especially for new firms getting started. You have an opportunity to share some resources as well under the company resources section. This is also where if you do a bulk upload, your file is saved. When you submit your portfolio, a file is saved. And when you submit your portfolio, a badge is saved that you can use in your website or your marketing, your promotion. It was a little bit in the weeds. So next time we look at the third tab, which is the submit portfolio. This is the tab that you'll go through after you've done all of your data entry, probably the last week in March, to go in and select your portfolio and move all of your projects. When you do that, and we'll talk about this in future sessions for sure, you'll want to hit that 2021 reporting year. Again, it works just like taxes. And then that information is what populates your reports tab. The reports tab here lets you look at your company's performance based on your submission. Right now, you can't see like a preview of it, which is one thing we've heard and we've noted and are talking about with the development team to be able to let you get a preview of your 2021 submission before you submit. But you can resubmit your portfolio multiple times to update this page if you do want that in-process workflow. So I'm going to hop back to the company tab and talk a little bit about, you're not alone, Jenny, but love that sort of vote of affirmation. The more you guys share with us on these calls, the better it equips us to have those conversations with our developer team and make priorities to make this tool work for you. So a couple of tips here. One really big change that's important to note this year. In the shift away from reporting calendar date, where we said last year, make sure it's 12/31/2020, y'all. That didn't work. We heard from y'all over and over again that you just want to think about this as, is it in my reporting year? And so we've made that change. But along with making that change, we now have a requirement that for the project to count in this reporting year, to count in year 2021, you have to have design data associated with this calendar year. And that is a shift from where we were last year to this year. The upside is it's really easy to do, especially if your projects haven't changed wildly. So for example, if we look at this project, 2 Quayle Street, you can see that it was last updated in reporting year 2020. And again, for folks who are coming back to the tool, the filters are a great option to be able to say, maybe we start with projects that were reported in 2020. And that's a great way of just pulling back and saying, what are the projects that we included this year? And that might be a good way to sort of start building your list and working through your projects. It can also start to give you a preview because you can filter on the reporting year column by 2021. And that's going to show you the projects that by default will come into your portfolio submission. It's not that full reports view, but at least it's a list that you can cross-reference. So that's a baby step for the folks who do want that. In any case, I'm going to go to a project from 2020. And so here, right, want to make sure that that project is still active. We want to track data. So I'm going to click either track data or click on the 3 button icon and go into track data. This is creating a new record. By default, it's advancing to 2022, but make sure it's 2021. We'll fix that. It's also advanced the reporting phase. You can report again in design development. You can go ahead and advance it to CD or CA, whatever the phase may be. It's bringing in all of the information that I previously reported. So if my energy model is the same, if there haven't been any evolutions in the design, just skim it over and say, yep, this is all right. And click save and go to project dashboard. And then it will create that 2021 record so that you have that information when you go to submit your portfolio. Another way that you can do that is by clicking into the project record and then clicking on the 3-dot icon on the side. And there's an option for duplicate for another year. This is, again, great if you have a project that maybe wasn't energy modeled, it still hasn't been energy modeled, nothing has changed, but you want to have that design record for reporting year 2021. You can click duplicate for another year. It'll give you the same little window. Here, I will advance it to next year. And then it creates a record and it copies over all of the same information. It's just duplicated it for reporting year 2022. So if you used like the old DDX going back a couple of years back in time, this is really similar to the advance function that used to exist. And hopefully we'll make it fairly easy. And yes, Jenny, to clarify, as long as you have one data entry point in the year 2021 and your reporting year equals 2021, it will pull in the project. It doesn't matter if you added that in March or if you add March of 2021, like actual calendar year, or if you add it today, but backdate it to 2021. What matters is your reporting year equals 2021, at least one record. You can have multiple records still within the year. It will bring it in by date entered. So for example, if you had a project, and this is the rabbit hole I go in, if you have a project that started in schematic design in January of 2021, and it moved really quickly, and you're in design development in June, you could add both of those records. You could add your schematic one and then add your design development. Both of them would have a reporting year 2021, but the system will pull the one that's most recently added. It will pull the one that's added for that, in this case, design development. And so if, for example, you didn't do an energy model in concept, but you do have one in design development, that's the data it'll pull for your year. So you can still add multiple entries per year, but you have to have one. For bulk upload, we recommend only entering one data point. Like, look at it as, where was I at the end of the calendar year, which is how a lot of firms who are using bulk upload have shared with us that they use the process. We reached out to you guys, we did a focus session. We did the workshop last month to introduce the changes, and we've heard over and over again, for those, it's entering one data point. So would very much recommend that for bulk upload. Just pick where you were at the end of the calendar year. But if you're using the web tool as a regular interface, go ahead and get in the practice of getting in there and adding the project when you're doing the energy model, when you're moving design phase. It's just a good practice to be in the tool regularly. I'm going to pause because there were some questions that came in as I was talking. I've tried to address those. Does that all make sense? I'm going to trust that it does. And if it doesn't, you know where to find us at 2030commitment@ai.org. So now I'm going to go ahead and do a very quick walkthrough of a project, and you're going to see a couple of the changes that have happened in the system. Again, projects don't need to be energy modeled to be added and recorded and tracked as part of your firm's progress. So we're going to go with a residential project that is active. Again, by default, you're going to have a project number that auto-populates. You can edit this to match a company record, or however you do, like maybe your accounting or your file management. What's important is that your project number be unique. So again, to that question about like master planning, or if you're developing like a multifamily property that has several buildings that are identical, make sure that you might need to either differentiate your project code So for example, if in your accounting system, that residential community is one project, here you'll either need to enter it as one project, but add all of those individual use types, or you can enter it with that project number and then a differentiator like 2022 Jones-A, 2022 Jones-B, etc. Just an important note for the system and how it works. Here we did reduce the project types, either interior or whole building. This is one of the only fields that once you pick, you cannot change. So that's, again, a really important note. This is because it determines whether you're seeing your LPB metrics or your EUI metrics. It talks about baseline, and it introduces a lot of error. So when you're setting up your project, just be really sure whether it's an interior project or a whole building project. I'm going to pop back up to status because I saw Jenny's question come through. If you worked on the project in the last calendar year, if you touched that project between January 1 and December 31st of 2021, you should report it. Now, that project may have gone on hold, right? You may have been working on it in the first quarter of 2021, making really good progress. And then the client said, you know what, we're not coming back to our building, or we don't know if the design works, or the cost of materials is too high, or contracts fall apart for any number of reasons or go on hold. So in that case, you might want to go ahead and list the project as on hold. Even though you worked on it, it will still count toward your reporting. Similarly, if the project was completed this calendar year, at the end of the year, the project might be complete, but you still worked on it, contributed hours, had a chance to impact carbon, and then canceled would mean we added it. It was a request that we got. And I think the way of differentiating it from on hold is the project is something you're not working on, but it might come back, and canceled is the project's not coming back. It's done, either lost the contract or client went out of business, or sort of any number of situations. These project statuses are really for you more than they are for us. Does that make sense? So if the project was completed in 2021, if it is done on sort of 12/31/2021, again, think about it like taxes, go ahead and log that project as complete. So I'm going to go ahead and pick an active project. Hopefully that made sense. I'm going to select new construction. This is the drop down of office or studio locations. If you're not seeing the one that you expect to see, contact your administrator and they can add it to the company page. We did move the United States to the top of the project country category. That was a small thing that a number of folks requested on these calls last year. So we made those changes. So we hope you enjoy. By default for domestic properties, of course, if you're inputting directly, your zip code is going to provide a climate code, climate zone. You can adjust that if you have a microclimate condition, and then specifying your units. What we're seeing in the database is, for the most part, people are using IP. They're using feet and pounds and inches, but you can use international units if you want, and that'll convert some of the metrics throughout. That first page of information is the minimum piece of information required to set up a project. So I know some of the folks on this call, when the company gets the contract, they'll have their marketing or their business development team or their accounting team do that first page of data entry. And then from here, pass it off to the development team. I'm going to push through. And I will come back to your question, Mona. We're pushing my limits of multitasking. So required fields here are occupancy year and energy code used. I'm going to go ahead and select California Title 24/2019 since folks asked for it. Daily average occupants, building costs, site works costs, construction costs, those are all optional fields. Don't feel pressed to use them, especially if you're just reporting in the first year, but it's great if you want to be able to track that for yourself and understand what are we seeing in terms of cost per square foot. We can go ahead and bring in our use types. These have not changed from previous years. They do map to zero tool, and documentation of how that happens lives within our help page, which you can find in the question mark icon in the top right of the screen. We're going to make this a small office building. You can have multiple use types, and you can do that by clicking add use type. Again, if you have that example going back to like a residential community where you might have multiple buildings, but you're reporting them all at once, you can either aggregate the areas into a single entry, or you could add the office small in this case, again, as a way of treating it as having two buildings. The choice is very much yours. And then if you've added one that you don't want or you choose to consolidate, you can click delete use type by clicking on that minus sign. Alrighty. By default, your baseline is generated. This is pulling from Zero Tool for domestic projects, and will provide based on the US national average for international projects. We'll click save and continue. This is where you'll confirm a target. You don't have to do anything here. By default, it's going to show you an 80% reduction for a whole building project and a 25% reduction for an interiors only project. The chart below allows you to understand as you're doing your goal setting how the project compares against the entirety of the 2030 database. And so you're seeing a box and whiskers there that will definitely make time for in a future call. So I want to plow through this with 20 minutes left. When you come out onto the page, you arrive at your design, your project page. And your project page becomes your home as you update your project and move it across time. At this point, we've not yet tracked any design data. So if we were to go to submit the portfolio, this project would not be pulled in. We obviously want it to be. So we're going to click track data. You can do that up here at the top, or scroll down to design phase data and click either add design data or track design data. So we'll go ahead and bring that up. This goes to Mona's question of what if the project has never had an energy model? If the project has never had an energy model, all you need to do here is make sure that your reporting phase is correct. So we'll say concept, and your reporting year is correct. I'm going to log this project as 2021. Again, maybe we started this project in January. Click save and go to project dashboard, and it's going to pull in a code equivalent based on various analyses that have been provided to AIA by third parties, which are documented again in the help section. So this is the code equivalency question that Daniel asked about earlier. And you'll see here that for California Title 24, 2019, the number we were provided is a 59% estimated reduction. So now again, let's say the project is advancing, it's moved in 2021. Maybe we did energy model as it moved into its next design phase. We can go ahead and click add design data to add a new design record. By default, it's advanced the reporting phase. Now it's showing schematic design and the reporting year. So we're gonna make sure it's still on 2021. Again, that's that really critical piece of information that works like taxes. And we're gonna open the predicted energy use section. This date energy modeled is optional, but if you are energy modeling your projects, it's a great place to add that record so you can start to build over time, especially as we see this feature get used, where you're actually seeing the changes. And also for record keeping, if you're going back and trying to be like, okay, but where did this data point come from? It's a breadcrumb that starts to help with that. I'm going to go ahead and pick one of our new energy modeling tools. Speed is one of them. Again, there's that list. It's in alphabetical order. Then energy party. This is required regardless of how you're bringing projects into the DDX. So we'll select architecture team. The cost associated with modeling is an optional field. But what is not optional is your predicted EUI. So you need to enter that value. And you have two options here. Either you can enter your top line KBTU per square foot per year number, which we'll say is 12, or you can enter your data by fuel source. And one thing we've heard, we saw a good number, not as many as we'd like, but a good number of firms who did use this option in the 2020 reporting year. But we heard from a number of those firms that it was actually easier to do because that's how they were seeing information in their energy model and they didn't have to do any calculations. So if you go down that pathway, you can select your values. And so here we'll do some grid electricity, and then we'll also pull in from some on-site renewables. And the system will calculate your gross energy use. It'll then subtract out your renewables from your electric contribution to arrive at a net, and then balance that out to give you a calculated predicted PEY. And so you can either give us that top line number here, 12.79, or you can enter your fuel sources to arrive at a comparable. Because we've indicated that we use renewables, the system by default is prompting us to say what type. And so here it's looking for some information. What systems do we use? So maybe we use photovoltaic. Maybe we use one of these other systems that Charlotte noted is new. If you don't want to track that information, you can just toggle off no and override it. You can also, again, this is a whole building project. If you want, add your predicted lighting power density, if you have it, and track your embodied carbon information. This was something we introduced last year. We saw actually pretty good participation. Would love to see more participation as we think about the real challenge of sort of carbon neutral buildings and reducing carbon. We know that 11% of global annual greenhouse gas emissions are coming from embodied carbon. So it's a great opportunity to get ahead of that. But you can enter that data here if you have it and you want to. And then ultimately click save and go back to project dashboard, which brings us back to the table. And so you're seeing that new information being brought into the system, including the performance reduction. So you can see the savings has jumped to 79% from 59% where it was before. Also from the project dashboard, you can add your collaborator. So if you want, you can search by email and bring in anybody in the directory. Again, you can add participants from outside your firm or keep it just to folks within your firms. That will have the project populate on an individual's portfolio screen. So again, this is great if you're an administrator and trying to push reporting responsibility down into your project teams. That was a lot of information. It was a lot of recap. I promise if you join more of our sessions over the next couple of months, we have 3 more scheduled, and Charlotte will give you those dates. We'll be able to get into some of the more nuanced parts, including the reporting process, the portfolio submission process. But I think that gives us a pretty high level of adding your project, tracking your data, changing your firm information, the pieces that you really need to get started today. And so maybe that's a good place to pivot and look at the questions. Charlotte, what do we have?
Thanks, Matt. We have a number of questions that folks have sent in here. One of them in particular is related to importing data via API. And when you do import data via an API, will that override original data, prior data that they've brought into the DDX from that tool, or whether it will assume it's a new design phase?
Great question. So if you're bringing it in as API, it should be bringing it in as a new design record when you're specifying in the tool, and each tool looks a little bit different. But I believe with Cove tool, which is the question here, I believe you're asked to specify your reporting year and your design phase. So it will bring in that information. It will bring in your PEY information, and it will add, it will bring in your energy modeling tool, and it will add the date that you link up with the API as the energy modeling date. So to be very explicit here, if you're reporting a project for reporting year 2021, but you're bringing it in from Cove tool next month, for example, your reporting year is going to be 2021. Again, just like taxes, even though the energy modeling date that will automatically come in will be a 2022 date. That date energy modeled field does not associate with your reporting year field. I hope that's clear. It's sort of hard in the virtual environment to know if I'm being clear or I'm just confusing folks. But again, don't hesitate to clarify or unmute yourself if that doesn't make sense. And of course, you can contact us at 2030commitment@ai.org and find time with staff to walk through one-on-one what this means for your firm.
Thanks, Matt. Another question that we have coming in is clarifying some of the how one approaches this if one hasn't done an energy model. And I know you covered this a little bit, but if you would be able to go back over for those projects where someone hasn't yet been able to do an energy model for one of their design phases.
Yeah, absolutely. And that happens, right? We were jazzed to see that 77% of projects that were reported last year used an energy model. That's huge because it really is an important pathway to understanding the consequence of the design decisions you're making. But they happen at different times and sometimes they don't quite make sense. If the project has never been energy modeled, when you go to create your project, and I'm going to go and click into a project that has been modeled, I think. It hasn't been modeled, that's awesome. Just make sure that your field is set to no, and that's the decision point, right? That's the only thing that needs to be set. So long as the answer to this question, predicted energy use, has energy modeling been done for this project, right? So long as you click no, it will default to your code equivalent. And it really is that easy. Now, if your project hasn't been energy modeled, but you know that you're using renewable energy sources, or you have done embodied carbon modeling, or you know your window to wall ratio, and you want to track that information because you want to be building the most robust data set you can for your firm within this tool, you can of course add that information and note that you have a solar thermal system or a heat pump, even though you haven't done energy modeling. It won't affect your performance. These qualitative fields don't affect your PEY numbers, but they do let you build a more complete picture of your project, even though in this case, the project has not been energy modeled. And again, setting it to 2021 because it works like taxes.
Such a good analogy. And we have another question in from the chat here about ongoing projects from 2020 that have not significantly changed in 2021 and whether those need to be reported again.
Okay, so the follow-up question is, if the project hasn't changed, but have you worked on it? If you've worked on it, if it's maybe moved to the next design phase, but the energy performance hasn't really changed, or if the project was in construction administration and it's still in construction administration, I would encourage you to go ahead and still report it. But again, there's a level of threshold that folks make. So one way I've heard firms determine whether or not they report is based on the number of staff hours spent on the project, and they have a threshold. If it's more than like 10 or 15 or 20 hours, they report it. Another threshold I've had companies share with me that they use is a % of contract. And then I have other companies who just say, nope, it's on the board. Like, we haven't done much with it, but it's still an active project in our portfolio. We want to count it because that is about that holistic view. So I realize that that's a very gray space answer. Glad to talk through that in more detail. But if you have a project like that from 2020, where it hasn't really changed, but you decide you do want to include it in your 2020 portfolio, I'd encourage you to first take your filters, hop over to reporting year and select 2020. That's going to pull in any project that had a 2020 record, design data already associated with it. So it'll give you that list. And then you can go through and you can open the tabs in a new window. If you right click and open on new tab, this is what I do when I'm troubleshooting with y'all, because it lets me keep all of my filters and my settings here. And then when you go into that project, again, you can go down very quickly within that design phase data and just click on those 3 dots and click duplicate for another year. Make sure that it's still in concept, make sure that your reporting year matches, and click save, and then you're done. So that's just acknowledging that the project is still happening in 2021. It just didn't really change. All the information is the same. So that's an option that's available for you if you decide you do want to include it. Wow, so many great questions. There was, I think, a question about the bulk upload spreadsheet, which does mean that it's uploaded via a spreadsheet. There is a specific format that you have to share. Under the company tab, when you look at the manage projects, there's a button for import. And when you click on import, there is a link to the bulk import guide that specifies exactly how the spreadsheets need to be set up. And there are sample files that you can download. And I encourage folks, even if you've done this year over year and you feel like have it down pat, I encourage you to still download one of these new sample files and build on top of that, just in case there's hidden data or weird things that can sometimes mess up the system. Though there have been a lot of improvements made with y'all's help over the last year, including the introduction of an XLS file, so you can do your work either as XLS or CSV. And appreciate the team dropping in a link to the open office hours where we talked about that.
One question, Matt, perhaps to pull out for you that I think is a few questions back, but I think a good one. For projects that are not new construction, they're existing buildings being renovated, how do you think about energy modeling and how important that is relative to energy modeling for new construction where you're really working with a blank slate?
Our position on the AIA side is generally pro energy modeling because it gives you insight to help you better understand the impact of your design decisions so you can communicate those to your project team, your clients, and your peers. Across the board, energy modeling is not required in the 2030 commitment, just period, right? It's very strongly encouraged for new construction and major renovation, but it is not required. Our firm has not been tracking projects once in the CA phase. Can you explain the benefit of including this, assuming no changes have been made to the documented design? That's a great question, Aaron. I think one way, you're not alone. That's maybe the starting point. You're not alone. And anyone who spent any time with me knows that like half of my answers to these things are gray space. And that's because in a lot of ways, the program's about making this like big picture goal work for your company. And so that means there's a lot of variability based on different firms, different practice, different compositions, different team structures, all the stuff you talk about when you develop your SAP. I think one argument for tracking the data through your CA is it's still work on the boards. And it's still where you're making sort of design impacts. That said, if the project isn't changing, if that doesn't meet some threshold again within your company for hours worked or attention or impact, that's sort of on your end. I will say that we are very interested in terms of how we're able to use the data set to share information with y'all in understanding the point at which a project is complete. So while that active, on hold, complete, canceled project status doesn't affect what goes into your portfolio submission report, it is used and considered when we're doing analysis and potentially based on some feedback that y'all have heard or y'all have expressed, wanting to be able to understand, well, when does a project stay conceptual versus when did a project actually get built? And to that degree, we like the idea of being able to understand that the project has actually been completed. It's a bit imperfect, is the ultimate answer. So I would say do what works for you, but conceptually it is still part of your portfolio. It's still an active project, and it's still a chance for you to make a difference in terms of carbon emissions. And then Pam had a great question, which maybe is a good last question. Charlotte, I realize I'm eking into your time because I know you had a couple of wrap-up slides. There is not currently a way to indicate in the system that your project is designed to be better than code if the project hasn't been modeled. We understand that that's a case, and that in terms of a number of other domains and spaces where you're working and communicating the impact of the project, you're factoring that in. One reason for that, and it's definitely something we've heard and have considered and are talking about, but one reason for that is that the code equivalents themselves are imperfect. And so generally, like, we want to be seeing energy modeling anyway, because while that is also imperfect, it is more likely to be closer to accurate to where your project is coming out. The code equivalents are based on sort of every type of building across the nation. They're not varied by region. And so you do see a lot of like, and they're anchored relative to another code. And so they're already in and of themselves an estimate. And so if you start taking code performance above that estimate, you start going down a rabbit hole where the numbers start to get less and less meaningful, and maybe even more suspect if you think about how you use that information to compare it against the rest of your project data. And so that's one reason we don't have it, but certainly something we're open to. And if there are ideas on how that could be implemented and how that would be useful for firms, please do share that with the 2030 team at 2030commitment@ai.org.
And Matt, I know that brings us to time, and I think we've done a good job of answering just about everything that's been dropped into the chat here. Thank you, everyone, for such wonderful and thoughtful questions. They really are all great, and don't feel like you need to stop here. If you didn't feel like anything was answered to your satisfaction or they sparked additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at 2030commitment@aia.org. I just dropped a couple links into the chat. One of them are for the 3 additional open office hours that we have throughout the remainder of the reporting period in February and March. One is for last minute questions that can relate to any and everything under the sun as you finalize your submissions. One is about submitting your portfolio in more specifics, and the other is a deep dive into adding projects into the DDX there, which I know Matt covered in brief here with us today. But please do join us for those. They're great opportunities just to refresh your memory. And the more you do this, the easier it becomes. I know folks who have submitted for several reporting seasons now can attest that that's the case after the first one. It definitely gets easier there. The other link here is to book time with us one-on-one. Very much encourage anyone who has additional questions or wants a one-on-one walkthrough of any of this to book some time with us, and we'd be thrilled to walk you through. But with that, I think that we will sign off for this open office hour at least, and look forward to talking with everyone and helping make this as easy a reporting process as we can. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoons.